Good afternoon. This is the Committee of the Whole, and we have returned to discuss with the nominee, Peter Shapiro, his appointment or recommended appointment by the county executive to serve as the chair of the Prince George's County Park and Planning Commission. Good afternoon, Mr. Shapiro.
Good afternoon, Mr. Chair.
You've gone through an arduous task, so we're going to get started. This is an opportunity for my colleagues to engage in conversation with you, ask questions, and without further ado, if you gave a statement last week, anything you want to say before I start calling on my colleagues?
Mr. Chair, I had the opportunity to speak before you all last week, and I'm happy to simply entertain questions.
Okay, we will start that, but I have to ask the boss of bosses, Ms. Miriam Brewer. Is there anything you need to say, Miriam?
Good afternoon, Chair Hawkins and members of the County Council. I would do a brief introduction of Mr. Shapiro, even though you heard an introduction last week, but I feel it necessary to reintroduce him. Mr. Peter A. Shapiro currently serves as the Executive Director of the Revenue Authority, where he oversees a $47 million budget and a staff of over 100 employees. The Revenue Authority, as you are aware, generates trade, industry, and economic growth for the public good through acquisition, development, and financing of real estate projects and the operation and management of facilities that stimulate employment for county residents and revenue for the county and its businesses. In addition, it serves as the county's parking authority. Mr. Shapiro has served in that position since 2013. Mr. Shapiro is a former member and a two-term chair of the Prince George's County Council, 1998 to 2004. As a council member, he led numerous community revitalization efforts and oversaw land use and zoning for the county. One of his most notable community revitalization projects involved in creating the vision for and spearheading the Gateway Arts District, a comprehensive public-private nonprofit revitalization effort resulting in over $500 million in new high-quality investments along the Route 1 corridor. Mr. Shapiro led the effort to pass the Smart Growth-Oriented 2002 Prince George's County General Plan. He also served as chair of the Metropolitan Washington Council of Governments, Transportation Planning Board, and Chesapeake Bay Policy Committee, and Access for All Advisory Committee, and as vice chair of the Metropolitan Washington Air Quality Committee. Mr. Shapiro also served on the Brentwood Town Council from 1993 to 1995. Mr. Shapiro earned his Bachelor of Arts degree in African American Studies from the University of Maryland, College Park, and earned a graduate certificate in Leadership and Organizational Behavior from the International Forum for Social Innovation in Paris, France. I present to you the County Executive's nominee for Chair of the Maryland National Capital Park and Planning Commission, Mr. Peter Shapiro.
Thank you, Ms. Brewer. Colleagues, you all are virtual, but I want you to know that Mr. Shapiro has with him the Chief Administrative Officer for the county government, Tara Jackson, the Chief of Staff for the county government, Joy Russell, and he also has the Deputy Chief Administrative Officer for Economic Development, Angie Rogers, and he has our one and only county exec liaison to the council, Terry Bell. With that, we are going to start with our conversation, questions, and colleagues, you can start off with two questions. We're going to start from Council District 1 and go to Council District 9, and then we'll return again if you have any second round of questions. At this time, Councilmember DeNoga, the floor is yours.
Well, I was prepared for the second round of questions. Mr. Shapiro was kind enough to join me for a community conversation with about 60 or 70 county residents from all over the county, and he answered a lot of questions at that time. I do not have any additional questions at this time.
Thank you, Mr. DeNoga. Councilmember Taveras.
Hi. Peter and I have known each other for a long time. We've worked very well together historically. But, you know, this is a kind of like a different type of animal. And we are, so we do have some concerns. But I want to be able to ask you, particularly in this new position, given the increased conversation regarding Parks and Recreation and its separation from the commission as it has been proposed. Are you aware that the commission voted to oppose the state bill creating a separate recreational authority in the county?
I am aware of that, council member.
And what is your position on this?
I don't have a position on this right now. I think that my orientation is that I'm looking at what's going to be able to, how are we going to provide the best services to the residents of the county, best recreation services. I think that studying this issue makes a lot of sense. Are there structural changes? Maybe, but that's part of what the process will tell us. And it needs to be a robust process and involve all the stakeholders. And I'm committed to being involved in that very, very thorough process. And I do not want to prejudge the outcome of it.
You realize that they came before us, I think a couple, like last week, to discuss, and they provided a briefing on, and based on my review of what they presented with the survey, they actually already did the study. They already did the analysis. So I'm not sure why we have a need for this at all. Would you honor and advocate for what the commission's position is and the direction the commission is currently proposing to change?
I'll certainly be making up my own mind about that. So a position that the current commission takes does not direct a position that I would take, and I'm keeping an open mind to this. I want the best delivery of services to the residents of the county, and I think a robust process to study that is a helpful thing to do. I do not want to prejudge that process, though. I'm not wedded to one solution or another. I'm just not at this point, council member.
Okay, and I'll leave it there. I mean, you've expressed where you stand on the House bill, the Blue Ribbon Commission.
Councilmember Taveras, I know you're ready to roll, but you don't have an opportunity during the second.
I'm done. No, I'm done. I just wanted to close with just saying again that there was a survey and there are results. So I'm just saying there is data that is already currently available. Thank you.
Okay, thank you, Councilmember Glavos.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shapiro, for being here today. And thank you for the county execs team who's present. I think I might just start. I do have two questions I'll ask, but I'm going to start by reading a letter into the record submitted by one of my dear residents who I happened to see last night. So I think it's in my mind quite a bit. And that is Sam Parker. People also know Sam Parker as one of our former planning chairs. Dear Council Chair Hawkins and council members, I am a resident of Prince George's County and former chairman of the Prince George's County Planning Board from 2006 to 2011. I support the nomination of Peter Shapiro for the next chairman of the Prince George's County Planning Board. I know the chair has broad management, political, and financial responsibilities. As such, the qualities for an outstanding planning board chair must include a deep understanding of the planning process and the importance of community participation in both visioning, planning implementation, and development approval. The chair must be an enterprise leader that can articulate a strategic vision that positions M-NCPPC and the county for success in the future. M-NCPPC's chair must be emotionally intelligent to advance the M-NCPPC mission in close collaboration with the county council, the county exec's office, and the broader community. In addition, the chair must have the knowledge to build a high-functioning administrative team that can guide M-NCPPC into the future during these fast-changing times. Finally, the chair must have the personal attributes of integrity, high energy, resilience, a positive demeanor, and the ability to maintain their mental and physical health in a high-pressure environment. I've known Peter Shapiro for many years and have worked with him on projects when he was a Prince George's County Council member and more recently on the Greater Washington Community Foundation Community Benefits Task Force. I've had the opportunity to observe up close his commitment to the county, his professional skill sets, and his commitment in meeting the needs of Prince George's County and advancing our status in the metropolitan Washington region. His experience, knowledge, and his visionary approach to leadership make him an ideal choice for the chair of the Prince George's County Planning Board, assigned Sam Parker, and actually dated just last week on the 14th. So I do have a few questions. So I think one, and speaking to Sam's letter, and I very much respect Sam's leadership as Park and Planning Chair. I remember the vision exercise, envisioning Prince George's County, which actually laid the groundwork for some of the work that we moved forward on TOD. So Mr. Shapiro, can you speak more to your vision and what you think the opportunity is at Park and Planning as you think about stepping into this role?
Thank you, Councilmember. Yeah, briefly, this is a unique opportunity, and in part it's a unique opportunity because of the new zoning ordinance and the countywide map amendment that's about to come into force. So it is a very unique opportunity for the commission. So this is the blueprint. This is the opportunity that we have to figure out how to operationalize all the conversations that we've been having and the commitment that we've been showing toward placemaking, transit-oriented development specifically. The vision is the same, right? It's about the right kind of development in the right location and how we get all the tools that we have lined up toward that. So it is around connecting with, making sure we're fully connected with the county executive and the council's economic development vision. And it's also about preserving neighborhoods and preserving the rural tier. It's all of that at once. I think the big missed opportunity that we have and that we're really starting to see some change with is the revitalization in communities inside the Beltway. And that's a piece that I have a lot of experience with, and I want to carry that vision into this role. It takes a lot of coordination of stakeholders, and that's something that I have a lot of experience with as well. So yeah, in a nutshell, what do I want to see? What's my vision? It's about preserving the rural tier. It's about keeping the more suburban style neighbors that we have stable, and it's about really putting resources into and revitalizing our inner core so that they're walkable, playable, workable places built around the transportation hubs that we have. That's my vision for the resources that we have with Park and Planning.
And then my second question, one of the things that Sam's letter speaks to is the importance of being able to build a high-functioning administrative team. And I think that sort of speaks to leadership and management styles. He also talks about emotional intelligence, which I think is very much about leadership and management styles. So can you talk a little bit more about your leadership, but also your management style, which I think really goes to the heart of this question. I think in some ways we've sort of focused on Parks and Recs, which is interesting given in some ways this position. It does oversee all of Park and Planning, but the planning chair role is a really important role. But I think it is a little bit about how do you manage and lead and come into a new organization that you've never been in, and can you describe sort of your leadership and management style in that sort of setting?
Sure, thanks for the question. And think I'd have to say, a little tongue in cheek, to comment on my own emotional intelligence might not be very emotionally intelligent. So, but I appreciate the kind words. And I think in terms of my leadership style, one of the most important things with any organization is to have a clear vision. And then to have a team in place that helps you to carry that vision down through the ranks of the organization. On a smaller version with the revenue authority, I feel like I've done a good job with that. It's an interesting opportunity for me because I have spent a fair bit of time focusing on leadership development in addition to the work that I do in the county. So I do some teaching at business schools, and the teaching is around leadership. And what I would say to somebody who's stepping into this role, which may answer your question about how I expect to take up the role, is to be very, very clear around what needs to change and why. So there's a kind of a frame that I look at. There's some things that are doing great, and part of my role is to make sure that folks are supported in continuing to build on the strengths that they already have. There are some things with any organization that require some measure of evolution. And there are some things in any organization that require some measure of revolution. And this is really a tricky piece, is to make sure that I'm crystal clear around what requires what, and then to lead in a different way depending on those needs. It may be a bit of a theoretical way of looking at it, but I think that frame will help me as I step into this role for this very complex organization. And again, I'm not prejudging that, and the risk of saying something a little trite, I'm quite aware that I have 2 ears and 1 mouth, and so a big piece of what I will be doing up front is to make sure that I'm listening to folks internally, externally, a lot of stakeholders. I'm fully capable of making tough decisions when they need to be made. But the key is to make the right tough decisions.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Streeter, we're going in the districts. I'm on Council District 4, and I will get to you as we get to District 7. I know I saw your hand. I just wanted to let you know what was going on.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shapiro, for being before us. I noticed the potential historical nature. You're sitting here in your confirmation hearing at the same time. The next potentially Supreme Court, the first African-American female Supreme Court judge is doing her confirmation hearing. So hopefully we do a much better job of our hearing than I think they may do at the national level. So you did mention, obviously, the new zoning ordinance in your comment to Councilmember Galeros, and obviously the countywide map amendment. And obviously we know those who been engaged in this process for the last 7 years, the first successful opportunity after a couple of tries. And I think, I'm not sure if you were one of those tries as well in the past as a member of the council. So can you just describe what, if any, role you took as part of the last 7 years of the zoning rewrite or the countywide map amendment personally? I'm just curious.
I didn't have a role in that for the past 7 years.
Okay. And then I appreciate that. So the question then becomes, how and what is your role? Obviously, if you're successful in becoming the planning board chair in the successful implementation of the new zoning ordinance going forward. Obviously, we know it's going, hopefully, to be effective April 1st. And the implementation of it, including obviously having dual zoning codes for those who want to continue to operate on the existing zoning, and for those who want to use the new code moving forward. Please describe what your role is to make this a successful process moving forward.
I mean, it's a good question. I think part of it is to work with the resources that I have available. There's a lot of folks who have deep knowledge of this. That's going to be very helpful. So I'm comfortable relying on staff in that regard. It's useful. It's helpful, and it's complex. And there's no doubt about that. I mean, I at the risk of over flattering, they're the folks with probably the single greatest knowledge about the new zoning ordinance and countywide map amendment are probably on, amongst the folks who have it, are probably on this call, including you, council member. So there are lots of resources out there that can help with the process. Yeah, it's complicated because folks will have a choice around old versus new. There are new processes in place. No longer having conceptual site plan approval. There are all sorts of nuanced pieces around this that will make the job interesting for whoever is in the role. And I'm cognizant that that there are lots of people that I can rely on to help me make sense of it as I go along.
Thank you for your response. So that's my 2 questions. I'll wait for the second round for a couple of more. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you, Councilmember Turner. At this time, we are at District 5 with Councilmember Ivey.
Thank you so much, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Peter, for being before us today. Of course, we've known each other a long time as well and under many different scenarios. So I feel like I know you well. And I've watched you kind of revolutionize the Revenue Authority and take it in a direction that I was surprised to see. I did not know that there could be that much development coming from that agency. And so I'm curious, what revolutionary things would you be thinking about doing in this new role?
Thanks for that. And I'm quite proud of the transformation that we went through with the Revenue Authority. And, you know, it really has been a rewarding opportunity to turn the organization into both a very effective parking authority, but also the county's development finance agency, and to be able to do both with integrity. So thank you for that. I don't have, and I do not have a prejudgment about what, if any, is the evolution and the revolution within M-NCPPC. Right? It is important for me to go in clean around that and to make, because I have experience, but my experience, and this goes back to Councilmember Turner, my experience is less hands-on given my current role. So I'm not afraid of finding both the evolution and the revolution, but I don't have a prejudgment about what that might be at this point, Councilmember.
Thank you. And I'm sure that Betty Hewlett is leaving big shoes to fill, but I know that she'll continue to be a resource to you as well.
And if I may, I just want to say that I have a long history with Chair Hewlett and a lot of respect for the work that she's done.
Thank you.
We are now in Council District 6, Councilmember Davis.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. And Peter and I have a very long relationship. And as a matter of fact, from the perspective of attempting to be very impartial with regard to my consideration of this is probably, as I've said to the few, one of the most important decisions that this county council will make in the last 4 years that we've been here. One of the most important things that we've done in the last 10 years we've been here is rewrite the zoning code. And I know Mr. Shapiro had an opportunity to participate in that process, and I'll leave it to Mr. Turner when we come in the second round to navigate more around the zoning rewrite and the countywide map amendment. But the ultimate importance of that is what brings me to the realities that I face as an unapologetic Prince Georgian. I've worked on the council now going into year 11 as a voice for Prince George's County, whether it be in the state of Maryland or the Washington metropolitan region, raising our stature in the Washington metropolitan region, but never losing our identity as Prince George's County. Have a lot of respect for my colleagues from Northern Virginia, Washington, DC, Montgomery County, and the rest of the state of Maryland. But as everybody knows, I am a Prince Georgian. Mr. Shapiro, that brings me to my question. Are you currently a resident? This is one of those realities that we often debate in Prince George's County, but rarely have the teeth of law to ensure. So I just want to go down the residency path. Are you currently a resident of Prince George's County?
I am, council member.
And when did you become a resident of Prince George's County?
February 3rd
Of what year?
this year, council member.
So last month. Are you currently a registered voter in Prince George's County?
I am, council member.
And when did you become a registered voter in Prince George's County?
Also February 3rd.
So I know
Davis,
that
you're
you
gonna
were,
have to hold your second round of questions to second round. I know
and
you're on the road.
I will respect the chair, and save my last three questions for the second round.
Thank you so much, my friend.
Anything
Mr.
for you, Mr.
Streeter.
Chair.
Mr. Streeter, we're now at Council District 7.
So my first questions follow the line of questioning that Mr. Davis took. So those are answered. So my next question was about the so in this wealth sort of creation sort of cluster that you are an integral part of. I wanted to hear your on inclusion and some examples of how you're going to approach the job such that there would be more equity and wealth creation, more participation by locals and minority businesses, and just equity in terms of how we do business from your agency's perspective.
Thank you for the question. My commitment is clear and long-term around this, and I also have the experience of the Revenue Authority with the significant projects that we've worked on. So I go back to my earlier days, and I just reflect on all the conversations I had and how much I learned from Wayne Curry, former County Executive Curry, as we all know, this building is named after, and how much he taught me about the importance of targeting resources. I'm using a bit of Wayne's words here, but how much we need to be targeting our resources to help build Black wealth. Now, we can broaden that out across sort of a broader view around people of color, but in Prince George's County, there's a special significance to building Black wealth. So I internalized that through my time on the council and in the work I've been doing in the Revenue Authority, again, a bit broader, but I'll use that as a shorthand. And perhaps the best example of that would be the hospital garage, which we just completed. All in, it was a $40 million total bond deal. It was about a $35 million development. And subbing under the general contractor, we were at 61.9% MBEs, county-based MBEs for that project. So, and then there's additional percentages around the soft costs, and even with the precast, the poured concrete. I think we were at 30% on just that piece as well. So perhaps the best answer to the question is not only is it something that I'm fully committed to, but the proof is in the pudding with the work that I've been at the helm of at the Revenue Authority. So I hope that answers the question. I'm happy to answer it in more detail if you have additional questions.
No, I think it goes without saying that everybody on the screen that has a long-standing history with you. We sort of know how you operate, but certain things just need to be made part of the record. And so thanks for your response.
Thank you, Council Member.
Thank you, Mr. Streeter. At this time, we are at Councilmanic District 8. Mr. Barrows.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and good afternoon, Mr. Shapiro. During an earlier question, you mentioned revitalization of communities in the Inner Beltway. Can you talk about that in the context of gentrification?
Councilmember, thank you. It's another great question. There's the short of it is I separate out gentrification and displacement. So gentrification brings with it its own issues. Displacement becomes very, very problematic for the residents of our county. And I want to use an example, if I can, council member, around the Arts District, where with our focus around that revitalization effort, there was effectively no displacement. Property values have gone up along that corridor. New housing has been built. So for me, it feels like an absolute win-win. Now in Suitland, which is where we're putting a lot of our resources now and partnering with the redevelopment authority quite closely, we want to get ahead of this issue. And one of the ways you get ahead of the issue is to make sure that we are also investing in affordable housing, workforce housing, more deeply affordable housing. And so that's part of how we're going to hold this commitment and make sure that gentrification, that increased property values, that the neighborhood transformation does not lead to displacement and honors the folks who already live and work in the community, especially live in the community.
Thank you. And then, am I allowed another question, Mr. Chair? How will you balance the demands from the executive, the council, and the community in your position?
Daily. I think that, it's the nature of the job where there are multiple stakeholders. I'm a former council member. I have tremendous respect for the importance of the legislative branch and the vital role that the legislative branch plays. I'm currently part of the administration with this quasi-governmental agency, and I get the different role that the executive branch plays in relation to the legislative branch. I'm also a former municipal official, and that taught me a lot about what it means to be pushing from, if I may say, the outside and trying to work both branches to get your priorities set. There's no simple answer to that question beyond it is fundamentally the nature of the role to balance that out and to make it crystal clear that I am not favoring one over the other, but working to get the agenda that I'm committed to through.
Thank you.
Council District 9, Vice Chair Harrison, the floor is yours.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shapiro, for coming before us today as committee as a whole. Thank you for your service to the citizens of this county over your tenure serving in public service and being as an elected official. I've had community folks reach out from the community in the southern part of Prince George's County, and to raise some concerns about maybe some of the business relationships that you've had in the past. And just for the opportunity and point of clarification that gives you the opportunity to describe these relationships, can you please describe your affiliation, role, and relationship with Pillar Development, LLC?
Sure. Thank you, council member. Pillar Development, LLC is my wife's company. I have no role in that. This is her business. She founded it. She's what's called an owner's rep, which is essentially a project manager in commercial real estate. She's been doing it for, I think, coming on 20 years. I think there was maybe longer, probably be annoyed with me that I don't remember the exact amount of time, but it's about 20 years that this has been her business. On and off again, she's had an employee or two, but essentially she's a one-woman shop and quite successful, and could not be more proud of the work that she's done over the years. But that's not work that I do. There was some confusion, and if I may, Mr. Vice Chair, reflecting on a conversation that we had, may I bring some of that data in, if that's okay with you? I just want to be, thank you. I just want to be respectful that we had a one-on-one conversation. So my name, if you had researched Pillar Development, you may have found my name associated with it. For the simple reason that for some of the teaching that I do, the payment that was made to me needed to be paid to a corporation rather than an individual. So I had my wife's company be the recipient of that, which was absolutely fine and normal. But what it did was inadvertently, it associated my name with my wife's company. I have absolutely no association with the work that she does around real estate development. Zero.
So, thank you, Mr. Shapiro, for your remarks. Through the District of Columbia Department of Consumer and Regulatory Affairs, that's listed on their website, and they list the transactions of this LLC. You were listed as a governor of the LLC. So my question is, if you were on the District of Columbia Consumer Regulatory Affairs website and the LLC information listed as a governor, did you hold that position while you were on the Washington, D.C. Zoning Board as the director for the Prince George's County Revenue Authority? Did you include your associations on your Prince George's County Yearly Ethics Filings Report and Financial Disclosure Report?
Pillar Development is, thank you, Councilmember. Pillar Development is listed on both as my wife's company. I believe also with the state, I can't actually remember whether the state asked for that or not, but whatever they asked for, I disclose. And in terms of the term governor, I researched that myself because I'd never heard that term before. And DC is a very, from what I researched, DC is a very unique jurisdiction in that for LLCs, it lists people associated with the LLCs as governors. It's just kind of an old-fashioned term. It does not connote any authority that I have over that. It just doesn't. It's my wife's business. It's 100% my wife's business. I have no role in that business whatsoever. If my name was associated with it, as you may have seen, that technical association, yes, that was at the same time that I was in my role in both Prince George's and in DC. But that role is a technical role on paper. I have no role with that business. That is my wife's business. And
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. I'm going to turn it over to my colleagues now. I'll go back around for the second round of questions. We'll have some more conversation, okay? Thank you.
Thank you very much.
Now we have the senior at large, member Mel Franklin, for his opportunity to engage you, Mr. Shapiro.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Just checking to see if my audio is working. Okay, great. Good to see you, Mr. Shapiro. As has been said by my colleagues, we of course have known each other for quite a number of years. I definitely appreciate when I was a new council member, you coming to see me and giving me some tips about being a new council member on the Prince George's County Council. So I do remember and appreciate that. I also want to thank you for the conversation we had, the virtual meeting that we had discussing your candidacy. I appreciate that as well. I wanted to follow up. And look, I mean, this is more of a formal setting, but let's be frank. I mean, you have a great record of accomplishment, but there are also some concerns, and I want to just be candid with everyone and say that we should be able to question a nominee in a respectful way, but still ask tough questions when they need to be asked. And I think when you were a council member, you probably did your fair share of that as well. And so now we're in that role, and that's our job. We wouldn't be doing our job for our citizens if we didn't do that. So none of my questions are meant to suggest anything personal. I'm quite fond of you and have been for a long time. I do want to follow up on Councilmember Harrison's questions because our citizens, when they hear things regarding development, there is a suspicion that pops up, and so when they hear that the spouse of the potential chair of the planning board looks like they are a developer. I know there's some questions to whether what a developer is or isn't. That, raises some understandable concerns. Some concerns about conflicts of interest. Some concerns about, is that too cozy of a relationship between development and an entity that essentially is supposed to regulate development? And it's a tough sell to some of my constituents, I have to be honest with you, to say to them, the planning board chair spouse runs a development company, and that's not a conflict of interest. It's a hard sell, because obviously that revenue is coming into your household. So how do you go to the citizens and make it clear that that's not a conflict of interest? Because to a lot of them, it looks like one.
Thank you for the question. It doesn't feel like one to me. And I understand around the perception in some folks' minds, and I can't control that. The short of it is she has had a single project in the county, very, very small, that she has stepped away from just through this process. But this is not where her work is. Yes, my wife is in commercial real estate. That's really, all I can say about that. It is true. If there ever were a situation, first of all, there wouldn't be, because she and I talk. But if there ever were the opportunity for her to have a project in the county, she and I both agreed it would not make any sense, just because of the appearance of a conflict. So yeah, it's better to err on the side of safety when it comes to that, around the integrity of the process. The other thing is, for most of the folks I talk to, and for myself, development is not a nasty word. It's something that we actually we're looking for quality development in this county. So I'm a little hesitant to say that there's something tainted around an association with my wife's project management company that could work for development that could have some connection to the county, which isn't even the case. But the short of it is, for me, developer is not an evil word that needs to be unconnected from at all cost. It's actually something that we want to see more of in the county, quality development.
Absolutely, and I definitely agree with you that developer shouldn't be a dirty word, and development is certainly something we need in the county. I'm just trying to address questions about, conflicts of interest, which is something we have to be sensitive to. And so let me ask you for my second question. I think we get two, and then we go back around. When you were on the DC Zoning Commission, it's my understanding that your wife's company did do DC projects, right? How did you navigate being on the DC Zoning Commission while your wife's development company is doing DC projects? How did you navigate sort of the perception that might be a conflict of interest?
She never had a project before the Zoning Commission or the BZA in any time that I served. If there had ever been a chance that had happened, I would have needed to recuse myself. But it didn't even happen. The project that she works on just didn't touch the role that I had.
Okay. Thank you. And I'll ask some more on the next round. Thank you.
Just, if I can, Councilman, one thing, it may be semantics, but it's important for her. She's not a developer. Mm-hmm. She's not a developer.
I get it. Well, the company's name is what throws folks off. It says Pillar Development, so we assume that's
right.
We assume they do development.
Respectfully, I'm giving you my word. She's not a developer. She's a project manager.
Gotcha. Okay. Thank you.
Colleagues, we will begin the second round. Peter, this discussion, I should say Mr. Shapiro, but my good friend Peter, the years of our long-standing relationship, I feel you can call me Calvin and I can call you Peter.
Not in this setting, Mr. Chair.
Okay. Mr. Shapiro, we're going to start a second round, and what will happen next Tuesday, the vote on your nomination will be final. So my colleagues wanted to ask some questions. Recently, the county exec had a very informative letter in the, I believe, Maryland Matters, because the chief administrative officer is sitting here, I'm gonna be on my best behavior. So I wanted to ask you, Peter, Mr. Shapiro, the county exec spoke about your commitment. You spoke about it earlier, your commitment to Black businesses in the county. Can you speak on that? Because, and I also want you to speak to Miss Elsie Jacobs. She gave you a big hug last week when you were here, and she was saying that there are no Black companies involved in any of the Suitland development or the revitalization over there in Suitland. Can you just speak about your record as the executive director, CEO of the Revenue Authority when it comes to county Black businesses?
Thank you. And I did not mean to imply that you couldn't call me Peter. I was just thinking more the other way around, Mr. Chair.
Oh, no, I took it for that. You're always respectful as I am to you. So we're on the same page.
So I would say this in the midst of a hug with Ms. Jacobs, which is that what she's saying is not accurate. And I'm only speaking to the pieces that I have some control over that are coming through the Revenue Authority. But the two biggest contracts that we've let so far, the first one is with the firm that did the demolition there, which was a minority firm. And we have just gone through the process of selecting the fee developer for the Suitland project, which is the development partner we're going to work with to build 2 new buildings that are going to be coming on the ground. And that also is a minority developer, Jerry Lynch. So the short of it is, in terms of, look at the record, this is where my commitment is, and I'm proud to say that we're delivering.
My second question, to be appropriate with my colleagues, Peter, the DCAO for Economic Development, Angie Rogers, has moved us in a direction of more affordable housing in a region that is lacking affordable housing. And with all the development that's occurring, if you are nominated or if you're confirmed as the nominee for the chair of the Parking Plan or the Planning Commission, how do you see your role in working with the county executive council, specifically Angie Rogers and her team, to get us to a level of affordable housing while we are going through the revitalization in the county we're experiencing?
Thank you for the question, Mr. Chair. And this goes back a bit to Councilmember Burrow's question as well. I think that we need to get ahead of this issue, and that means we need to put our money where our mouth is around commitment to housing affordability. I'm going to use DCA Rogers' words around this a little bit, but it's not good enough that we have a lot of naturally occurring affordable housing. It is imperative that we get ahead of this issue and we invest in housing that is permanently affordable for residents, for existing residents, for new residents. So, any way that I can build on the resources of the commission to help further that goal, I will. And I'm equally committed to that with the Revenue Authority, but I'll have more resources to work with M-NCPPC. And I have a long history of commitment to working with underrepresented groups across race and class lines. That's been part of my work for coming on 35 years, and that will continue in this role.
Colleagues, we are now starting again. Councilmember DeNova, you're raising your hand. I was just coming to you because you serve in District 1. You're at the top of the order.
Thank you. Yeah, District 1 is number 1. I have a couple comments to make. One, the question of equity came up, and I think that's a great question. But I have a unique perspective. Mr. Shapiro was the chair of the council for my first 2 years in office. So I'm the only person that served with him. And two things stick out for me. One, he tried to take me under his wing and teach me like he did with Mr. Franklin. But as you know, I don't listen to anybody, so he did the best he could under the circumstances. But one thing he did do, and this is, you all don't remember the old building and the old setup, but he took me into a small conference room one day to meet Gustavo Torres and Kim Propiak. And they had some undocumented workers who wanted to talk about the challenges that they face. And Peter introduced me to CASA and all the good work that they do. In addition to that, when we had agencies in front of us, Mr. Shapiro was the one that asked that they were printing information bilingually. And those are things that I learned from him about equity. And that was 2002-ish or so. So I just want to convey that to folks because I think that's what Mr. Shapiro is about and where he comes from. Another thing that I wanted to touch on, the planning board members are supposed to be citizens, not necessarily experts. It's good to have people with experience and broad experience, but they're supposed to do, like we're supposed to do to a certain degree, listen to the planning director, the planning staff, the general counsel of park and planning. They have a lot of resources, and they're supposed to apply common sense and understanding of vision of the county to the information that's there. And Mr. Shapiro, having been on the district council, the zoning board in DC, the revenue authority, is certainly capable of picking up the zoning rewrite for the policies that are in it. I don't have any doubt about that. And I think back, Mr. Parker was a park and planning employee, but he was like in the historic preservation area. He was not a zoning person. Meanwhile, if we have citizens who are concerned about Mr. Shapiro's wife being a developer in DC, do we have the same concern? And I know some people do, but Ms. Hewlett was a named partner in a zoning firm for many years. But that gave her great perspective. It gave her a lot of information, understanding of the processes. But of course, that had nothing to do with Parks and Rec. I mean, I think what you want is someone with a broad base of experience, particularly in land use, governmental operations. So when we have these questions, they're good and valid questions. But I just want to point out that Mr. Parker did an excellent job. Ms. Hewlett's done an excellent job, but she also brings arguable conflict of interest questions. No offense to Ms. Hewlett, but those questions have come up. And to me, it comes down, is Mr. Shapiro of the character and the background that's appropriate for the position? And the last thing I'll say is, we've gotten testimony in the record from dozens and dozens of people around the county, mostly in favor. We've gotten a letter from civic association leaders or other activists, a couple dozen from around the county. And so to the extent that there are concerns, I mean, I can only imagine if I was put up for appointment, I'm sure there'd be a lot of concerns raised about me. Anyway, I don't have any questions, Mr. Hawkins, but I did want to relate a couple, particularly my time with Mr. Shapiro on the county council. Thank you.
Powerful words, Mr. Denoda. Thank you. I definitely heard you. We have District 2, Councilmember Tavares.
Thank you. My understanding was that when Ms. Hewlett came on board, she gave up, right? I think this is a different situation and a different scenario. But for Mr. Shapiro, what do you believe are the biggest issues facing the commission?
Thank you, Councilmember. I think first and foremost, it's what we've talked about so far, which is coming off the zoning rewrite and the countywide map amendment, the opportunity that we have at shaping how we develop this county. The right kind of development in the right places to help the county's economy grow and help create the kind of community that we want for the residents, communities that we want for the residents. And just as important is rural preservation. So these things, for me, this feels like the primary task. There's lots of other issues that will come before me in lots of ways. I can tell you this is the piece where I'm coming in with the most passion, and where I feel like it will take a good chunk of my attention and energy.
Okay, but it seems like well, maybe it's just me. I saw a lot of support from the Sierra Club, which, not to say I don't support them, and I've been, very supportive of environmental issues in the past, but I feel sometimes some folks are not very realistic in terms of the challenges that the county faces. And sometimes, oftentimes, some individuals can be, or very vocal individuals can be very anti-development. So how do you balance that voice that seems so supportive of you and issues like, you say, rural preservation, and at the same time, the whole issue with the county, the main vehicle for the county to increase its revenues has historically been housing and construction?
Thank you for that. I mean, this is the question of the challenge, and I'm proud of having support of environmental organizations, smart growth organizations, members of the business community, and I think for me it speaks to my consistency and integrity around these issues. I believe in environmental preservation, and I have a track record to show it. And I also believe in quality, smart growth, and placemaking and transit-oriented development. I have a track record to show that, and it's a balancing act. It's always a balancing act. But I'm proud to have support from folks of all walks of life in that way. And my vision, the one thing I'm doing consistently is being clear about where I'm coming from, what my message is, what I believe in. And I do believe in putting more emphasis on revitalization. And I do believe in minimizing the intensification of the development in our more developing tier. And I do believe in preservation in the rural tier. And I want to make sure that I operationalize that if I take up the role. And it's the direction, it's what Plan 2035 says anyhow. And I just want to make sure that we live up to those words with the resources that I have available to me and under my leadership if I'm confirmed for this. I hope that gets to it, Councilmember Taveras.
I'll leave it there. Thank you.
Thank you, Council Member, number 2. So we have District 3, Council Member Glaros.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. I didn't mention earlier, but we did have a chance to meet and talk virtually. So really appreciated that conversation. I think I would maybe start off with a comment and then 2 questions. So one, appreciate the dialogue going on. I am really struck actually by the variety of support that we do see in the packet today for this nominee. And I was on a conversation with our director of the Economic Development Corporation, David Iannucci, a few days after the appointment was mentioned, and he was speaking to me about how he was hearing positive things from the development community about Mr. Shapiro's appointment, and it actually comes as no surprise given I think some of his work over at the Revenue Authority and his track record in Prince George's County and his legacy that exists along the whole entire Baltimore Avenue corridor with the Arts and Entertainment District. and his work also in partnership with Redevelopment Authority in Suitland. But I'm also struck by the fact that, yes, there's also statements of support from the Coalition for Smarter Growth in here, from Sierra Club, and even last week we had Greg Smith, who I must admit, we don't always agree with Greg Smith on a lot of things, and is very concerned always about integrity. If I could say anything about Greg Smith, integrity is number one, and he was testifying in support of Mr. Shapiro, even though he also has concerns about moving forward with the Recreation Authority. So it just really strikes me we have a really wide range of people who have weighed in from all across this county and who have a lot of different perspectives. And I think that is really important as we think about this agency, because it is such a critical agency in our county as we move forward and continue to improve the quality of life for our residents. So my two questions. So one, my first question actually is around sort of leadership and management, which I think, at the end of the day, that is, in my mind, a really critical component with this position. So one of the observations I've had of both the planning side and Parks and Recreation side, in fact, I'm pretty confident that if the directors of either side were here in front of me, they would be nodding their heads. And one is a staffing challenge, right? We have, and this was the case before the pandemic, this is definitely the case in the pandemic, how do we attract talented team members to help deliver on these objectives we want to see happen over at planning and at Parks and Recreation Department? There are a lot of vacancies on both sides. Retention is really critical, and in fact, we've seen a lot of turnover in both agencies over the last bunch of years before the pandemic, definitely during the pandemic. People are exhausted coming out of the pandemic, those who are still with the agency. So can you speak to, which I think is probably one of the most important roles for the next chair in this position, is how do you grow talent in the agencies? How do you support that growth of talent? How do you support that growth and retention? Because at the end of the day, we are only as good as the team members we have around us, and the team that we will.
It's a complicated question, especially from the perch that I would assume if confirmed for this. The things that are going to be more in my control is helping to shape organizational culture. And that's part of what helps retention. I know that from my own experience at the Revenue Authority. We've had a very good retention amongst the management for all the years that I've been there. And that, I think that speaks to the culture of the organization. And that's something that I will want to be working with the existing leadership to continue to promote. I also think that the more that we're clear about the vision of the organization, the more exciting a place it is to work. It's connected to culture, but it's a little different. And that can help us with recruitment as well. So I think that's the short of it. I recognize that this is a real issue, and it's not even just an M-NCPPC issue. It's a regional national issue at some level. But there are things in our control that we can do about it. And I think that's where I would start from my perch.
And then my second question revolves around the zoning ordinance rewrite. So I appreciate my colleague, Councilmember Turner, asking a question. Most folks know that I had the opportunity of chairing and Councilmember Turner vice chairing when we lifted the zoning ordinance rewrite. I'm also willing to admit that as much as I know that detail very in depth back in 2018, I feel like even today we're always learning new things as they associate with the zoning rewrite. I was on a call with Terry Bell the other day on something that we didn't even, we had forgotten about that was in the ordinance, because we're now for the first time after 3 years really picking up the document. We're seeing developers pick up the document. We're seeing developers analyze, do we use the old ordinance? Do we need the new ordinance? And it's actually a really exciting time in Prince George's County. And we are also seeing a lot of folks actually move forward with projects that maybe they hadn't thought about moving forward with. And I think that is very much, when the council undertook this, part of what we wanted to see happen. But I will never pretend to be more of an expert on the zoning ordinance rewrite than Chad Williams is. He is by far the guru sitting over in the planning department. I probably put Derek Rolage and a few other people in there. And because he lives and breathes it every day, right? He is the expert, and he's the one that I call upon if we have any questions on anything, and he's easily able to analyze it. And I say that I'll just do a big shout out for Chad, who really is the guru on it. Because I think at the end of the day, you do need to rely on your staff members and the experts around you as we sort of think about implementation. And you definitely have some really amazing experts that sit in the planning department. So on the zoning ordinance rewrite, speak a little, we are going to be in this interesting phase, I think, for the next 2 years, right? We're holding both ordinances, right? We're holding the old ordinance. We're holding the new ordinance in the same space. Can tell the history of how we got there because I was at the table when we negotiated this sort of position. I think it's a brilliant position to be in oftentimes because I think we get to learn a little bit, right? There's no way you got a code right the first time. So talk to me as you think about like, how do you hold both in the same space? Because the planning board is going to need to be nimble enough to go between two codes, right? So can you speak a little bit to that and how you think through the decisions, how we sort of hold both in the same space and at the same time refine the new one so it can be even a stronger code? Because there's no doubt that we missed a few things in 2018. I know that.
Let me take most of what you said as a very clear and lucid comment rather than a question, because I just agree with you. You're laying out the complexity of the task clear as could be. Some of these decisions are not in the planning board's control in terms of what choices a developer may make going forward. That's part of it. But the other piece that you touched on, which I completely agree with, is to be mindful of the ways in which this is very much still in specific ways. It is still very much a living document. And that's part of the task, is to recognize that and figure out what needs to be tweaked as we go along, as we learn, and to do that carefully and with integrity. So yes to most of what you said, and that's the additional nuance I would put to it.
Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Councilmember Turner.
Thank you again, Mr. Chair. Thank you again, Mr. Shapiro. I just want to touch on one question I think that Mr. Burrows actually already asked. So I don't know if I want to ask it because I only get two, but it is about, so let me ask a different variation of it. And it's related obviously to our role as the district council, the role of the planning board. Obviously you have the experience of being a member of this body, and having to deal with decisions by the planning board. And obviously this is in the context of a new zoning ordinance, so there's going to be some flexibility that we're going to have to do and some interpretation kind of issues. But I just want to get to I'll get to the underlying basis, because there is a certain tension that's been created by having a separate commission doing our planning function. That is not the case in other jurisdictions in the state of Maryland. So having served as a member of this body, and then potentially, if you're confirmed for this, serving as a member of the commission, what's your opinion of what the role of the planning board is and its staff versus the role of this body as the district council? And I put it in the context of, all due respect, the members of the planning board are appointed. The members of this district council are elected by the members of this county and the residents of this county. So within that context, I'm just curious what your position. I know you got to balance the stakeholders, but do you believe that this district council ultimately has the authority to approve, disapprove, or whatever development processes that are going on? And that the planning board that's it. It's a planning board. You make recommendations as part of that. So that's kind of a fundamental question of where you kind of stand on that. So I'm just curious given your experience, where you stand on that issue.
Yeah, I think thanks for the question. By statute, you're describing the law. So it's not for me to say whether or not, I'm not interpreting that law beyond, yeah, you described the reality of where the authority is. What would we say? We're your principal land use advisor. And I'm not sure first of all, it's not my orientation as a former council member, but I'm not sure what value it would bring to undermine the authority of the district council. It's not productive for the residents of the county. It's not productive for the planning board. It doesn't recognize reality. So yeah, I'm with you. We are a unique beast, and this is the nature of how authority is delegated.
And I say it in this context as well, because I'll give you one instance where, we were all on the same page moving forward, and we were successful as last year with the discussion about legislative changes that we needed to make in order to complete the countywide map amendment. And so you had all of us, the district council, the planning board, and obviously the county executive, all going to the state in unison saying, we need to complete this process. Here's a wrinkle that, nobody had really thought of, when you're thinking about a countywide process versus an individual development review application. And so we were successful in doing that. But there have been other times where the commission has not supported, positions either of the executive or this council when going to the General Assembly. So for me, it's again, it's one of those fundamental questions, what you believe the role of the planning board chair is. And obviously, you're just one of 5. So it's not necessarily just your decision. Obviously, you have to negotiate that with the members. Obviously, those members are appointed as well. And, that's maybe a conversation that we have with the executive because, some of the members are holdover members. So I don't know if there are other changes planned as part of, moving forward, with the commission going forward. Obviously, we've seen that discussion occur now on the park and recreation side. So again, it just goes back to the fundamental essence of where you kind of are and obviously being in that position, particularly, since we do have a vision, we have Plan 2035. Obviously, in my case, we just moved forward with the new Bowie, Mitchellville, and Vicinity Master Plan to give us some direction as we're implementing, the new zoning ordinance. And obviously, those are going to be occurring. We got the countywide master plan of transportation that is ongoing now as well. So, from my perspective, even though we have different approaches, perhaps as the district council, as the county executive, the planning board has to be a partner in us moving forward for us to be successful in any of the things that we're trying to do. So I hear that from you, but I just wanted to give you the opportunity to express that because I know that's been an issue in the past, to be honest.
Thank you for that. And allow me to answer this at some level the way I answered Councilmember Claris's, which is yes. What you are articulating is the both the opportunity and the challenge. Right? When we are not aligned, we tend to be less effective. Is there a role that I can play in helping to make sure that we are aligned? Yeah, I have a role in that. It is my orientation. My orientation is to find ways for us to collaborate and to have a unified voice. So I hope that answers it, but the short answer is you're describing, the complexity of managing multiple stakeholders.
Good. Thank you, Mr. Chair. I think that was my 2 bites at the apple.
Madam Abby.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I don't know that I really have another question. I think that it's interesting that we're saying this is the most important appointment. And when you come to land use, which is a big part of what we do, of course it is. But I really thought that the police chief was our most important appointment, given the history of this county. And we knew very little about Chief Aziz. We knew his resume, and we got to meet him once, maybe. And I have to say, I was wildly enthusiastic about him. I had to trust the county executive's judgment. I don't rubber stamp her. I think that we all know that. I thought she made a great choice, and I was very happy to publicly say so. In this case, we all have the advantage or disadvantage of knowing Peter. So it's a lot different, perhaps, when we can't just rely on the judgment of the county executive and trust her. But I do trust her judgment on this particular appointment, and I am very enthusiastic about Peter Shapiro being, I hope, the next planning board chair. And I hope that we can all rally around him and with the same enthusiasm we show to Chief Aziz. So that's all. And I also hope that you'll keep in mind the Climate Action Plan, which is something that we've also recently passed and is very important to what you would be doing going forward. Thank you.
Thank you.
Thank you. That chief is a Dallas Cowboys fan. Council member.
Then he's not perfect, but he's still great as a police chief, which is what we hired him for.
Yes, and I'm asking a Dallas Cowboy fan to speak. So let's stay off that, Mr. Davis.
I just was going to opine that, you know, that worked for him politically in my book. He was a Dallas Cowboy fan, not a commando, as Mr. Denoga calls the thing that plays here in Washington area. but you know, it's funny because I think we kind of, I think my colleagues, I think we've kind of hit the crux of the matter of why my questioning stayed in the realm of the uniqueness of this moment. As I said, the police chief is an excellent pick, and I commend the county executive for most all of her picks. Matter of fact, I can't remember a time when I spoke negatively about one, and I will not speak negatively about Peter. I reserve the right to call him Peter, even in this setting, and he knows he can call me anytime. The reality is, personally and professionally, Peter and I, we go way back. The crux of the matter, though, has been laid out and articulated in two pieces that I just want to highlight, and that is leadership and politics. I heard Ms. Glaros's line of questioning along the zoning rewrite and Mr. Turner's along the zoning rewrite, and I often say that from the perspective of what we did as a council, we laid out what had been missing. And the reality is that Peter and Tom, to some extent, were around one of the first times that they tried to rewrite the zoning code in its entirety. And in park and planning reminds us twice failed attempts to make that happen. Peter, in your response to me, just talk me through why you think it failed before. And as I finish my weave on the first part of my question, I want you to recall, we inherited from councils past. Prince George's County has always been urban, suburban, and rural. We've had 15 metros for years. We have very little activity to occur at our metro sites for a long time. I won't point fingers or cast fingers of blame. But ultimately, and I recall this really, really brightly in the front of my mind, Mr. Franklin and I having this conversation in one of our first weeks as colleagues, when we talked about transit-oriented development from the perspective of Largo Town Center and Branch Avenue. And we kept saying to each other, why in the heck didn't somebody do something? You know, that was the line of our conversation. And I said to Mr. Franklin, I said, well, Mel, if we don't, they'll be saying the same thing about us. And we started that day down the path of putting transit-oriented development first. The next path was to rewrite, was to update the general plan. Plan 2035 came out of that same thinking. And out of that same thinking came, we must be successful in rewriting the zoning code. All of those things occurred. One thing, and I thought Ms. Glaros would jump on it because of the context of this conversation, she also was tapped to manage what we're doing with regard to a comprehensive housing strategy that sprung out of conversations around affordable housing that was really a brouhaha in Prince George's County. Nobody wanted to talk about affordable housing because it had already had the stigma of affordable housing. So we convened a group We took two of our committees. We created an ad hoc situation. We put the two chairs of those committees in charge of that ad hoc situation. And out of that, we hired a consultant like we did with the zoning rewrite to come in and walk us through all of the missteps. And we made significant strides in changing people's perspective about affordable housing by talking about housing affordability and having a comprehensive strategy. Out of that came the downtowns in Prince George's County and also the delineation of town centers. So first, Peter, talk me through the failure with regard to the zoning rewrite, because I think the political crux of the matter falls in leadership in the politics of Prince George's County, which is way different from the politics of Washington, D.C. So talk me through the differences and how you would lead in this new environment.
Yeah, thank you for that. On the, when we go way back, what I was involved in was the new general plan back then, 2002. So my focus was on the, making concrete the idea that there is a rural developing and developed tiers, and that we should have different standards for those different tiers. That was a success. It was early, and it was not nearly as robust as what we see now, not even close, but that was successful. In terms of the effort that you're describing around the rewriting of zoning ordinance, that actually was not what I was involved in at the time. So I feel successful about one piece, just didn't have much involvement in the other.
We'll blame that on Tom.
I take I take half the blame. Councilmember Harrington and I were doing that. I'll take my share if you take his share.
So Peter.
Yeah, so on the broader question about what, why are we where we are now, and what sort of lay the groundwork for the success of now, and whose leadership, can sort of claim credit for where we are now. There's a lot of that to go around, and I want to, thank you for taking your initiative around downtown Largo and really putting the emphasis there. I feel like I have my version of that with Route 1 and the Arts District, which had a real positive impact on the county. And I think downtown Largo can be even more transformative. It helps reshape the perception of the county internally and externally. That changes market forces. Once market forces change, it's a whole new ballgame, right? We just have a whole lot more to work with. Even like little things like inclusionary zoning, which is right now, as much as we want to use every tool that we can to incentivize and grow more affordable housing, some tools just might not be the best fit given where our market is. Market focus change, tools like that become really valuable. So, I think, you and I are, this, you and I are quite aligned around this and have a similar vision. And I'm looking forward to collaborating in all sorts of ways, if I'm confirmed.
So thanks for that, and I'll just close out with my concern, and I would be remiss if I did not stay on where I started. The elders who have gone away from here, like Nat Axum, Ron Russell, Hank Arrington, even Wayne Curry, and even some colleagues previous. This is one of the only positions where residency is a real issue. The reality is with most of the positions in our charter, residency is not an issue that is explicitly delineated by the law or by the charter. This is one of them. And I think it's purposeful. And also, I'll also say to Ms. Ivy, who mentioned the responsibility of land use, which I think Mr. Turner articulated as unique in the state of Maryland. It's the premium and most important part of our job. The budget is transmitted by the county executive. We have a specific role with regard to it, and we make all the laws in Prince George's County. But we are the land use authority. We are final authority on almost all land use decisions. It is our job to do land use, and it's unique and it's difficult, and the responsibility is all three: personal, professional, and political, and it requires that the relationships and that the effort work in that manner. So I just say to you, Peter, that yeah, there is concern around the fact that you left Prince George's County, went to Washington D.C., ran for office, worked on their side of the street for a very long time, and then when this great opportunity showed up, you came back for it. I'm not mad at the fact that you came back for it at the reality, but I do have to balance that appropriately in how I think politically, because I don't think you get away from the politics of these responsibilities. We're all elected. We are all elected members, and when we appoint someone, we have to think about our responsibility as elected officials. So thanks for sitting through. You don't have to try to answer that. That's one of those things that I have to grapple with.
Councilmember Streeter.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I have two really simple questions. The first one is just, why do you want the job? There's a second part to that, but Council Chair will say that's my second question. So I'll just.
Go ahead, Mr. Streeter.
And so
waiting.
Yeah, and what things do you can bring to bear to take this agency to the next level?
Councilmember Streeter, the second part is what helps me see myself as prepared. Is that the second part?
Yes.
Okay. Thank you. You know, I believe in public service. I've been doing it for almost all my adult life. I really believe in Prince George's County. I've either lived here and or worked here for almost my entire adult life. This is very much my home, even if for a chunk of time it wasn't my residence. It is again. Almost the entire time that I was living in DC, I was working here. I think all of you know, setting aside some of the politics around this, I think you know my commitment to the county. It is, fierce and long-term. I'm so excited about the potential of this role. I feel like I have been in training for this role for a long time with my set of experiences. This kind of goes to your second part of your question. Even the zoning commission in DC helped train me to step into this role with a whole lot of experience. Agency director, former council member, even community organizer. I can't even tell you how much learning I got in my early years from being a community organizer and how much I carry that into all of my public leadership experiences. Because it's so easy for me to remind myself what it's like to be on the other side of these conversations and to be respectful of folks who are trying to make a difference and who don't have a whole lot of formal authority. So all of that blends together, and I feel quite suited for this role. I really do. At the end of the day, you have a decision to make, but I'm really confident with my qualifications to serve in the role. And in terms of the residency issue, it's not even negotiable, right? It's a requirement of the job. I already, I'm in. I already have a house under contract. We already are selling our house in DC, or, I can, in a longer setting, I can have a personal conversation about the personal life choices we made and what led me to move. And but all I can tell you is I just could not be any more excited about the opportunity that's ahead of me here.
Thank you. And my second question is, what have you found to be the best way to monitor your progress, your goals, make sure you're keeping on track, and those of your staff? And give me an example of when you had to hold staff accountable and move in a new direction if you felt the need to.
Thanks for that. It's all about the metrics, right? It is critical that you have systems in place to help measure performance, and that the goals are clear, and that also people are bought into the goals. So one of the things that we instituted at the Revenue Authority is to make sure that managers are part of the budgeting process, so that they help shape their piece of the budget so that they can be more accountable to the outcomes that are being asked of them. And we make sure that that's not done in a way to minimize output, but to maximize output. So it's both respectful and there's real ownership over it, and it's made us quite successful. Second part around hard decisions. Yeah, I mean, it's just often the hardest thing you can do is to let people go when they're not performing. And, you know, we had a couple instances with the Revenue Authority. I'm not going to call out specific individuals, but this is more around functions where there were at two different points over the years, there were two different functions that we felt no longer made sense to have these functions staffed. And so we had to make a very difficult decision about letting chunks of people go. And yeah, that's part of leadership, is just recognizing that sometimes these very difficult decisions have to be made, and you do them respectfully of people. You do it with integrity, and you make tough decisions. So perhaps maybe in a slightly more private setting, I can go into more detail about that. So I'm not naming individuals.
Thank you. Mr. Chair.
Mr. Harrison, Councilman at District 9.
Thank you, Mr. Chair. Mr. Shapiro, thank you for, you're getting a lot of questions from us today, and I thank you for answering those questions from an honest place, and really being able to articulate some of your vision that you have moving forward, whether it's in leadership or just what you think the potential could be with economic development and land use for the future of Prince George's County. As you know, we had the opportunity to speak, Mr. Shapiro, and I left that conversation, but as the days kind of went on, I started to have more questions, started getting communications from the public about certain questions. And, the first two questions I asked you about the involvement of pillar development, and you answered those, but you mentioned that you have no position or role with Pillar Development LLC, but on the official Washington, D.C. business registration website, you are listed as an official member. Regardless of what you say here today, you are registered as an official member. So you might want to clear that matter up, or work on that. The most recent activity was on October 30th, 2020. That's listed on their website when there was an officer added, which was your wife. You were added on October 4th, February 4th, 2005, and then February 12th, 2019. So I'm only going by what this is listed on the business registration website. So it seems to me that you did admit that you received compensation through the LLC for your speaking engagements. So if you could just help clarify this for me and anyone that is watching in the public domain, is please, Mr. Shapiro, because that LLC was registered at your last known residency, which you just conveyed that you're selling your house and you're already investing into Prince George's County and moving back after a 15-year hiatus. So please explain to me, what type of business does Pillar Development LLC engage in, and who are some of the company's clients, so we can better understand when you make the assertion that you have no role in this Development LLC. Could you please do that for me, please, sir?
Absolutely. So my wife has three main clients right now. One of them is the Washington National Cathedral. And she's helping them on one of their, it's not the main building, but it's an educational facility that's on the site. And she's helping with the redevelopment of that. Her second main client is a very large company called Grosvenor. And she is what is essentially doing the punch list as they're turning over condos. It's a building that's in Eckington in DC. And so she's working with the new purchasers to help them work through any final issues that they have. And the third client she has is the Chevy Chase Land Company. And she's helping them on a variety of issues around properties that they have in Friendship Heights on the Montgomery County side and on the DC side. Those are her three main clients. She's also done a few restaurants that I think she may have lingering relationships with, but I think they're kind of wrapped up. And then she did have one small project in the county that she has stepped away from, and it was a small project. It was a community center working with an HOA in the county, but she's not associated with that anymore, just to avoid even the any kind of appearance of conflict.
Thank you, Mr. Shapiro. I have one last question, and I'll be pretty much done with my line of questioning. And I thank you for answering the questions that we have. And it really is to the LLC. And the reason why is I've been staying on this is because, I know what it says on the official website, and you are listed. So my question is, and it's centered around this, is have you ever or your wife ever filed income taxes jointly that included the Pillar Development LLC because you received compensation through the LLC?
We only file jointly every year.
Is the LLC a part of that? Since it was at your home address?
Yes, she is a sole proprietor. So we file one joint tax return, which includes all of the activities associated with Pillar Development, which is her business as a sole proprietor.
And that was associated to your last known residency, correct?
I assume so. I mean, there's no other.
Yeah.
You tell me the address you have, I'll tell you if that's our last known residency. But yeah, I mean, she hasn't had an office for a good while, so she runs it out of her house.
Thank you so much, Mr. Shapiro. Thank you.
If I can, council member, I just want to, at the risk of sounding defensive, I just want to be clear about what she is and isn't. She's a project manager. The clients hire her to manage projects. She's not a developer. She's just not.
Is that work through the development company, development arena though?
Yes, it's a
Okay.
commercial real
Thank
estate. She is in commercial real estate. Yes, 100%. That's what she does.
Council member at large, Franklin.
Thank you, Mr. Chair, and thank you, Mr. Shapiro. Just following up on your last answer. So in differentiating between a project manager and a developer, is the distinction that she doesn't own part of the development project? Is that why she's not being regarded that you don't regard her as a developer? Because she's helping develop the project, but you're saying she's not a developer because she doesn't own part of the project? Is that the distinction?
That's a distinction I'm making.
I see. Okay. But she helps develop the project, but she just doesn't own a piece of it.
My wife is in commercial real estate. Pillar Development is in commercial real estate. She works on development projects. It is as transparent as can be. I can give you the projects. I can give you the clients. She is in commercial real estate. That's what
Sure. No, we were just trying to, for those who are watching, try to clarify what all this stuff means, because it's not to a layperson. To me, quite frankly, it's not always clear what all these terms mean that we're mentioning. Okay, so I just wanted to. You mentioned that Pillar Development stepped away from a project that is in the county. Is your position and Pillar Development's position that Pillar Development won't do projects in the county if you're planning board chair?
Yes.
I see. Okay. And one final thing on the, you mentioned you had a discussion earlier with the chair about county-based MBE participation. I know that the county auditor is asking for some information from the Revenue Authority on that, and she hasn't gotten it yet. So would appreciate if you, and it's actually information I asked for 2 years ago as well, and I don't know that we got that information. So if you could have the Revenue Authority respond to that request expeditiously, that would be very helpful. We're trying to sort of develop sort of the data around Revenue Authority assisted development projects and how well they perform when it comes to county-based minority business opportunities.
And if I can, council member, I am astounded if there's, the county auditor has asked for information that they're not received. And if that is the case, this is the first time I'm hearing about that.
Okay.
So
Thank
I
you.
certainly want to follow up on that. But if the request has come in, I can't imagine that the request has come in and didn't come to me, and I have not received that request.
Got it. I think they're just working with some of your staff, and maybe it didn't come to your desk directly.
Councilmember, respectfully, that's not the way it works. So, and with all due respect, if that request had come in, that request would come in to me, as it always does, and I've not received that request. So, again, respectfully, I want to be clear. I've not heard about it. We certainly can turn around information on a dime around this because we already have the numbers crunched.
Yep. Apparently, as of yesterday, Mr. Graves, I think, said that they were working on the request. I believe the request was placed last Tuesday. I think it's just maybe, I don't know the internal workings, but the request, my understanding, was placed last Tuesday.
Thank you for that.
Sure.
Colleagues, for a third round, are there any additional questions? Mr. Denoga, Ms. Tavares, Ms. Glaros?
Thank you, Mr. Chair. I wasn't sure there was a third round, but I must admit, I have to say, I've been finding the line of questioning about a women-owned company run from our home incredibly interesting. I appreciate, Mr. Shapiro, that you file as a joint couple. That is actually what my husband and I do. But I would actually share, perhaps, and maybe I will just read publicly what can be found on the website about pillar development, so we can better understand what it means to be in commercial real estate. So the services provided is site selection and due diligence, schedule and budget management, pre-construction services, vendor and contractor management, contractor review and negotiations, change order analysis, construction design review, staff augmentation, bid phase management, cost evaluation, construction scheduling, value engineering, project control system, inspection and quality assurance, permit and regulatory assessment. So once again, those are not what a developer per se does. And then there's also a piece on our clients. In case people are curious, your wife has some amazing chefs as some of her clients over the years. In fact, I have to say, I want to talk to her about how we can attract some of these great restaurants to our community on a side note. But she has a whole list of entities she's worked with, from working with Rolls-Royce to an Indian restaurant to the Episcopal Diocese, to the University of California, to Greenpeace, in those capacities. So it's a really wide range of different clients who use those types of services depending on, once again, the commercial real estate market. With that said, as a proud woman, I would just say I appreciate Mr. Shapiro's honesty and integrity, and I appreciate the work that his wife does in her field. And I know, just like me, you can balance conflict of interest and has answered those questions very thoroughly. So thank you, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Turner?
Mr. Chair, if I can.
Oh, yes, please go ahead.
Councilmember Tavares' dogs have any questions? I'm trying to figure out what to look at. There you go. Just one.
Be careful, Peter. He may.
Okay, all right. I apologize, Mr. Chair.
No, I appreciate it. Thank you. So I appreciate Ms. Glaris' comments, but the questions have been raised publicly, so we need to address that. And I appreciate Mr. Shapiro's answers. I did have one question related to that, because obviously the commission is regulated by the State Board of Ethics. And so, as all my colleagues know, given our experience last year dealing with the countywide map amendment, you don't have to be the developer to create the conflict. If you're involved with the development process, whether you're attorney, project manager, or whatever, that will trigger state law, whether we think about that personally or not, right? Whatever we think about it personally. So I think it's, a legitimate course of questions just to understand what the nature of the relationship is. And so my question is more related to Shapiro. Obviously, since it is the State Board of Ethics and there's our provisions under the state code about conflicts of interest for the commission members, have you sought legal advice or an opinion from them with respect to your relationship, obviously with the company, obviously that's related to your wife? Those things can be managed, but just to make sure that we don't have an issue, I think it's appropriate to make the request to the State Ethics Board to be able to operate if you were to get this position, so that there wouldn't be an appearance or an actual conflict going forward, despite your comments that there would never be anything in Prince George's County. None of us would ever know that, and obviously you have to disclose that as part of your financial disclosure each year, which you said you did. So that would be my advice, to try to resolve that issue to the extent you can get that issue resolved going forward, because I think that's the only way you protect yourself, you protect your wife, you protect the commission. So that would be my unsought legal advice to you if you haven't done that yet. And so I had one general question. I know we went through your appointee data form and all listed all the things that you've been affiliated with over the years, and obviously very impressive in that way. So let me just ask the question that I always ask anybody and I always interview with. Are there any affiliations or memberships with any organizations? Some of them have been mentioned today in your comments that would impact or influence your role as the chair of the planning board. So in essence, are you going to kind of disassociate yourself with some who may come before you as a member of the planning commission, even though you may have long-standing relationships, memberships? That's something else for you to consider, because again, people will raise the issue of the appearance if you have a membership with a particular organization. So what's your stance with respect to that?
I think I agree with you. I think that the perception matters. And so that's the decisions that I've been making around connections with organizations. For example, I was on the board of Community Forklift, which is an organization I think most of you know, and I'm no longer on the board because it's an example of where, don't even need to have a perception around showing favoritism to one organization over another.
And obviously,
so that's just an example of it, where I'm very mindful of the public perception and, take the appropriate steps.
Yeah, and I'm sure as a former member of this council, that, we're always asked to serve on boards and stuff, and we refrain from that because of issues of appearance and conflicts. So that's one of the, depending on your perspective, it's either a benefit or a burden of being in the positions that we are. But obviously, that's something that you have to consider as well.
For me, to your point, council member, it's not even a consideration. You just take away even the perception around that. It's easier.
Okay. So I think that was two questions there, if I remember correctly. But thank you again, Mr. Shapiro, for your comments today and staying with us for almost 2 hours now. So.
Almost finished. Councilmember Ivy.
Slightly off topic, but since we brought up your lovely wife, one thing I know about her outside of her regular work is she's been really involved with the domestic violence issue in DC. And I do hope that she would be willing to bring some of that experience and expertise out to the county since your residence here now. And in fact, the executive director of DASH that she's been really involved with lives a few blocks from me here in Cheverly, Kube. So, and I know her through Leadership Greater Washington, actually, not from living in Cheverly. That's kind of strange. But in any event, that's something else that you bring and a benefit that we get with Julia. And so I'm hopeful and optimistic that you'll be the next planning board chair. Thank you.
Thank you. If I could throw one more kudo her way, is for those of you who don't know, she actually grew up in Prince George's County in Suitland.
Council member from District 6, Mr. Davis. You good? Council member from District 7, Mr. Streeter.
No questions, Mr. Chair.
Mr. Barrows is good for Council District 8. Council District 9. Senior at Large, Council member Mel Franklin.
I'm good, Mr. Chair. Thank you.
Thank you, council member.
Mr. Shapiro, are there any final words before I ask for a motion to adjourn committee of the whole?
The only thing I'd say is I appreciate the opportunity for dialogue. I know this is, I understand that the role and the importance of asking the questions that matter to you and to your constituents. And so, I appreciate the opportunity. I would be honored to have your support. And I think you know the kind of experience that I have and the kind of orientation toward collaboration that I have to make sure that we'll be effective partners if I'm honored enough to have you all confirm me for the role. And I'll leave it at that. Thank you, Mr. Chair.
Thank you. Madam Brewer, anything before we go?
No, sir.
Thank you. Colleagues, at this time, if we don't hear from Lucky, is there a motion to adjourn? Properly moved by Councilmember Glaros and second by Councilmember Davis. Any discussion on the motion to adjourn? Seeing none, by a show of hands. If you support the motion to adjourn, the majority prevails. Good day, good afternoon, ladies and gentlemen. See you next week or this week.
This conference is no